extremely fat. Everyone is born on a seesaw, and life already has the proper balance between you and everything else in place. All you have to do is sit back and enjoy the ride, if indeed you can accept the ride as meeting your criteria for enjoyment. And there's another rub, said life, with the few. It's bad enough that ordinary men are never satisfied, but with the latter bunch, they're not even satisfied with the idea of being satisfied. If I were the kind of life given to flip colloquial exclamations, I could say that regarding them, either, well, shit, or extend to them my guarded respects. And now on to a totally unrelated subject. Anyone who will actively participate in something being said about them is not a fully developed and realized man. And in fact is as shameful a case as a life that would deal in the vernacular. Maybe you have to read it rather than hear it, and maybe not. One way that life continues to stay on top of things and not let certain matters get out of control is by still causing most people, when they hear things said that are too close to the bone, react as though they have absolutely no idea what it is that's being talked about. Was that a long one or not? I did that on your behalf so that you think, well, it wasn't our fault. Whose fault was it? It's only you and me. Oh, all right, it's my fault. What the hell? Like I care. A more alert man has no fear of murder, inasmuch as he realizes he is already engaged in a strangling of himself. Like that. But perhaps metaphorically. The ordinary's attraction to the idea of martyrdom is quite misplaced. Well, insofar as it having any practical potential. 'Tis only children playing cowboys and anti-cowboys who believe that one must die so as to live better in a future life. Those who've outgrown such games are beyond the grasp of misconstruing metaphors for dying and living with dying and living. Put another way, if it is not something that you are presently, actively, and knowingly engaged in, then whatever it is inanimate, and you're simply not attuned to its rancidity. Expanded consciousness cannot look upon the institutions of collective man with awe based on ignorance necessary for them to be taken as meaningful. And sometime later, a viewer wrote to ask if there are institutions that are not the product of collective man. Good question, huh? By the sea, by the sea. A man who knows what's going on, trying to talk to ordinary people about it, is like some idiot standing up on a cliff, pissing into the wind toward those on the beach below who, although claiming to be looking for rain, are in fact, you guessed it, desirous of sunshine. Every dream and picture the collective has of public mystical teachers is far removed from any historical reality, in that such men, whenever they actually appear, have nothing to ultimately say about the nature of existence other than to themselves make note, what can you say after you said that there's nothing to be said? It is only on the pretend mental shores of men that sham storms leave a trace. The conscious no longer require an area of potential danger. The conscious no longer reside in areas of potential danger, even of illusionary potential, which about covers all his normal coastline. By the sea, don't you wish you could see? While the advice people give one another doesn't actually help, when it is operating at maximum efficiency, it does make the person receive it feel better for the moment. The only areas in which thought is competent, much less expert, are those of its own invention. Yet another legend, yet another lesser-told version of one of man's favorite creation tales tells of God directing Adam out of the original peaceful garden with the caution that he can never return as long as he remained the fool that he proved to be. And supposedly, as he walked away, Adam stopped long enough to ask the big guy how he would be able to tell from such a long distance if he, Adam, ever stopped being a fool, so that he might come back. And 'tis said that God replied, "Oh, no problem there. All I'll have to do is watch whether your lips are moving or not." And if you think this version's obscure, what's even more obscure is anyone hearing it and understanding it. You know, same as always. The problem is in the mind thinking, for instance, that mere silence is the opposite of speech, and going the contrary of arriving. For those of you truly on a mystical spree, there is yet another brute which says that those who begin to see the light as they experience an increase in their visual ability will eventually evidence a decrease in their vocal inclination. And the two of them agreed. We will name this song, Same as Always, Same as Always. The life of collective man is like 6 billion lions laying in the tall grass, peering out as best they can between the blades at the rest of life. And those hungry for individual consciousness like lions with cigarette lighters. According to legend, in one universe, life once accidentally described itself to the creatures of one world in a manner backwards from what it intended to. And after realizing its error, realized that they then had to be destroyed. A lion who can hear such a tale and not feel the love of pyromania stir within him has yet to appreciate the full potential of big cat existence. And now an item from the world of fashion. One man attempted to name his thoughts, "You ignorant bastards," but they beat him to it. No, wait. Are you sure you got it right? I don't mean that they named themselves that. They'd already named him that. Now that's really funny. Ha, ha, ha. Now you can go ahead and laugh. Ha, ha. Hey, viewer writes, I say, what in Klein's name does the above story have to do with fashion? I didn't think anything could top the punchline I'd already used in the tale, but boy, did you prove me wrong. And the viewer writes again, you're not expecting me to understand all this, are you? Sir, please stop it. You're killing me. Ha, ha, ha. One father so explained to a son, the struggle for so-called enlightenment or the awakening involves no less than a man experiencing a different awareness of and relationship to life. A description that may sound relatively unexciting, but when lived is extraordinary indeed. And the boy went away, repeating to himself the words, a different awareness of and relationship to life. And you might care to note that all efforts, such as to remember yourself, to count every breath, to quiet the mind of all noise, anything that requires focusing of attention, touches on what the Father was speaking of. All such activities will ultimately change the actor's mental state of his position in the overall picture of, his mental sense of, his overall. All such activities will ultimately change the actor's mental sense of his position in the overall picture of sentient existence. From one view, there should be nothing not realized by all. For why should life provide man with the singularity of consciousness, if not to afford him the possibility of a unique association therewith? A more alert man is like a Noah, confronted with a never-ending global flood, but one which the alert knows is internal and mental in origin. makes all the difference in the world. Although it is needed for the stable social life of barnyard animals, men giving one another advice as to how they should live is not unlike pigs hurling at sheep their dung, carrying with it their highest recommendations thereof. Tonight's blunt medical news. No one is conscious in the individual to the individual extent possible unless they are moment to moment struggling and intending to be. That, dear dreamers, is the beginning and the end of it, all smooshed up together in one short prescription for your convenient consideration. The creatures of one planet believed that everyone was born atop a ladder. But as they began their ascent to maturity, they fell off into a swampy place, there to peacefully live out their days as high-born, low-fallen creatures of one planet. And Pythagoras, no, not that one, the real one, in reaction to this story said, "It is truly neat when everything balances out like that. I love you, man." End quote. A man who does not think of his normal state of consciousness in the fully modified term of chaotic consciousness does not have a 1970 Pontiac. Or for those of continuing solid expectations, does not have any useful comprehension of what consciousness is all about. One mother so advised a promising daughter, "There are two specific instances in life wherein, when questioned, you should never respond. The first one is when life asks you anything at all about yourself, and the second is the same thing." Conversation. There is no such thing as a dead giveaway, except as concerns those who are dead. Are you speaking of brain dead? What the hell other kind is there of any interest? According to a piece of pottery recently found in a recent location, the idea of a spiritual teaching for man came about somewhat accidentally when, at a very early stage in Earth's development, some cows attempted to talk to some sheep. And to this day still, men's ordinary thoughts continue to expect things to make sense. What are we? What are you? What are you, ask a pig, crazy? And by the way, might I point out that all of you, being human and all, you don't have to take that kind of crap off some damn dumb animal. No, sir. No. The clamor of life and perceptions thereof. The conscious here conflict amidst peace, and peace amidst all conflict. How man's ideas, if reversed, might sometimes make more sense. What if so-called UFOs are not, as claimed and believed by those interested, actually from other worlds visiting here, but are the other worlds, and we are unknowingly visiting them? And a viewer quickly writes in to say that, "I can take this item and stick it you know where." I suppose he's one of those interested in such matters. Well, you can usually tell. And oh yeah, not just about UFOs, but anything. Or else they'd have no such passionate reaction, now would they? A man once did a genie's cousin a real small favor, and in return, after a no little bit of hinting, the spirit said, "Oh, okay, what'll it be? What kind of reward do you want?" And the man said, "I'd like to know the truth about non-physical passion." And the genie, in an exasperated tone of voice, replied, What the hell you think I just exemplified in my whiny response to your hinting? And wham! Just like that, the man was run down by a 70 or maybe 69 Bonneville. There was once a man who caught a strange fish on his line. It was so powerful that it could pull him anywhere it wanted to. But the man was so clever that he could pretend that wherever the fish pulled him was where he wanted to go. The historical mistake, mused one man, was that between the two Isaacs, Newton and Walton, they failed to realize the deeper angling significance of physics. The ultimate spotter's tip for those of discriminating taste. If it is preferential and not body-based, it is thought. Only from man's old survival-based brain down do organs and activities automatically operate at their maximum potential. Unless you mentally remember this, what else can be possible? Unless you're able to get thought out of its natural environment, nothing is possible. Put in travel terms, you have no place to go. And in response to the many questions regarding the matter, yes, men could be different, but no, they can't be. I feel like you're getting somewhere when even silence has an echo. The speaker opened his remarks with a definition. Critics, dung beetles so constipated as to be totally fascinated with the refuse of others. And someone in the audience raised a hand and inquired, how does this differ from those who simply try and report on what men do? And the speaker responded, are you crazy and comatose? What kind of idiots am I dealing with here? A reply that shut them all up pretty good, all right. The speaker went home later that day and tried the same thing on himself, with mixed results. And now let's move on to our gardening feature. There was once a land in which the planters came to realize that, due to their local, unique soil conditions, there were no such things as results, only mixed ones. And upon having this fact sufficiently embedded under his fingernails, one man with a trowel remarked, this is the very sort of information that can save a man not only from useless effort, but better still, from useless expectations. And now from our travel section. It is thought, not consciousness, which will faithfully await trains that everyone knows are never going to come. But it is, of course, only by this arrangement that the necessary pretend world of human mental depots can exist. And now from our reminder department. Don't continue to fall into the alluring, toxic trap of holding in your mouth opinions of places you've never been. Not unlike car companies' secret warranties, life has an unannounced policy toward man which, if you're aware of it, is operative, and which is, don't pick on me, and I won't pick on you. One father told his son the following tale. Near everyone's feet is a hole in the ground, and men's ordinary instincts will prod him to bend over and look down in it. The elder stopped there, and for a sizable length of time the lad waited for him to continue his comments, which he never did. To remind you that what I was going to use tonight is in no wise any attempt at a historical commentary. But there is an aspect of man's history that is at the heart of where the mind meets the shoreline, the older shoreline. An area in which there are continuing stories that it should strike someone that there is much more afoot, certainly than their literal content, and even more so than the easiest metaphorical analyzations thereof. These being in particular, what I have in mind, I bet you're about to tell us. You clever devil, you. Is, or are, catastrophic legends, or for those of you who prefer an extended verbosity, legends of catastrophic natures, or legends whose nature is based upon catastrophe. Are you satisfied now? One of the most, again I repeat, this is of no particular significance itself historically, but as some of you may or may not know, east and west, some of the most ancient writings and even their own reference to pre-recorded history and tales is a particular catastrophic legend of the flood. And those of you of more parochial backgrounds, this story in no wise arose from the Jewish tradition. It is easily, demonstratively easy to find records everywhere. It is one of the oldest catastrophic tales and legends on this planet is of a flood. As always, anything that the mind is dealing with does not fit the mind's own classification of being unconditionally invented, no matter how strange it is. If there absolutely is nothing resembling UFOs, gods, or an honest attorney, if they're all just, in a sense, figments of a man's imagination, as they would say, they may be, but they are not totally figments, because there is no such thing as that, as some planners discovered or opined tonight, due to the unique soil of the orb upon which we stand. They could not grow true results, only mixed versions thereof. Are you with me so far? Huh? Back to the tale then. You can take the possibility. In fact, I'm sure there's some so-called archaeological or geological supposed evidence that the planet has been within the scope of man's comprehension after the fact, that there have been perhaps floods. So the story could be based upon literal reality, which is, what the hell? Might make interesting reading, but, what's the significance? So then you have anybody fitting the definition of an operationally intelligent man will come up with any sort of story such as that prevails. It is part and parcel of the continuation of the story that men have begun to take it metaphorically or symbolically, according to how sharp you're looking, but at any rate, that it is fairly easy. It is predictable. I can do it before the fact or after the fact. Anything that turns into myth, legend, history that survives to the point of not being just dried ink upon a page, but seems to create some passionate stirrings within those who repeat the stories, which is what legends and myths really become, or what they are. All of them are based upon something real. Like I said, they're based on something real anyway, but they're based more on something real than simply facts that the 100 Years' War was actually fought between 1492 and 1597, and don't ask me how it works out. Who would I look like? Pythagoras? The myths actually get passed back to the catastrophic kind of myths related to the flood, a flood. Of course, within every culture, within the closed-in system of any particular culture, religion, the history of some people, it is not one of floods, it is the flood, capital T and capital F, the flood. Past the point of it being a potential physical reality that occurred. If it is going to survive, it will immediately take on allegorical trappings. The obvious one being, about the only one extant, is that it represents metaphorically, allegorically, a flooding, an overcoming of man by the forces of what? General Motors? No. Evil! Get off that damn Pontiac. You drive me crazy with that crap. I think some of you are still back to the first one tonight that had to do. All right, I'll put it to you this way, since it didn't seem to work, and we're already speaking about the past. You might want to write this down. It just came to me. I hate to brag, but let me tell you what. Those who forget the past are doomed, sooner or later, to get hit, if not by a Pontiac, a Buick. Now does it make more sense? I mean, who am I dealing with around here? People who want things to make sense? It's a matter of expectations. It's actually a matter of verbal, that is, intellectual expectations, and a viewer immediately wrote, as soon as I said that, and so what other kinds are there besides mental and physical? Exactly. All right? Exactly, but only one of them has any pertinence to what we're talking about. And the viewer, he still immediately wrote back and went, you can take the flood as it's been done, metaphorically, because any legend, all the way from the idea of the Holy Grail, the Tower of Babel, the universe being turtles on the back of turtles on the back of turtles on the back of turtles. The idea of a great war is evidenced in the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita, this great eternal battle wherein life continually recreates itself and in some way internally destroys itself. All of these, you can take it first, all of them, always. They can be taken by the, shall we say, at the extreme, but minimally, they are always taken by the simple of life. The simple, physical, less developed people at any time in any place, they can and do take these stories literally, which is the basis of all so-called fundamentalist religious beliefs, is taking such tales literally. Even if they will acknowledge, when pushed, that there might be some allegorical, although they won't call it mystical or spiritual, possible interpretations to put on top of the literal. But they insist, the more simple of the world, simple-minded, remember, not in any insulting way, but those who are still driven more by the survival instincts of the body than they are any intellectual potential, they take all such myths. They insist upon that the myth is grounded in reality. That is what makes, nowadays, they're called fundamentalists. That's what it takes, is you must insist. A fundamentalist, and there are areas of fundamentalist thinking outside religion, but these example being religion, if they heard someone interpret the death and resurrection of their hero, like in Christianity, Jesus, they might hear some minister or some commentator try and point out that this could have allegorical aspects. There could be a kind of a dying to one's crude nature. That is, the more religious, the more Christian-like one becomes. That his nature, your old crude evil nature, is spurred on by Lucifer and all of his minions. That as you gradually die like that, you are reborn as a Christian. They will give you some of that, but they will insist. They will insist that they want you to agree or at least know their position. That may be true, but that's not the important part. The important thing is that Jesus physically died and got up and walked away. And they will point out that without that there is no religion. Without that there is no Christianity. And there's versions of it everywhere else, as you know. And they never even are capable of hearing that. No commentary on religion or Christianity any more than this was a history, but I can't resist since everybody seems to look blank. Ordinary people, in the example of almost all revealed religions, but Christianity is specific, the fundamentalists, the simple, the backbone of humanity at any particular time. They will insist that even though there could be an allegorical patina or possible interpretation of the crucifixion and resurrection of a Jesus, they will insist that may or may not be true. They might tell somebody that made such an interpretation, they might say, well, what you just said, that's kind of neat. And that sort of allegorical interpretation, could be correct. That could have some validity. It could be useful. But wait a minute, don't get distracted. That still does not distract from the literal fact that Jesus was killed and arose from the grave, that he actually came back to life. Now don't you forget that, they will say. And if you showed any doubt or any resistance, this is also very common in Christianity and other religions. But they will then add, they'll go, wait a minute, it must be true. They'll say that is at the heart of our faith, because if it is not true, if Jesus or whoever it is, Buddha, whoever they believe, if he did not overcome death, then our religion is a moot act. That if, in some way, this God, and again I assume all of you is not historical significance, but the death and resurrection of Jesus is just one of the most recent in a long line, as old as the flood stories, that throughout history, in places much less civilized than the area of the Middle East from which arose the story of Jesus and Christianity and Judaism, much older than that, much cruder than that, is everybody anywhere, all peoples everywhere that had anything resembling a religion, which if they became civilized, they did, every one of them has some story of a past hero who died and came back to life. Because that, at the most simplistic level, at the most fundamental level, is the purpose that religion serves for simple people, for ordinary people, is a belief, a hope, a dream that we will overcome death. And so they tell the truth from their view. For them to say, wait a minute, even though there could be allegorical potentials to the death and resurrection of Jesus, that may be, but by God it actually happened. Don't forget that. It happened, because if it did not, if dear Jesus or dear Prophet X or whoever it was in their history, thousands you've never heard of, they say, if so-and-so, the founder of our tribe, the Genesis mother of our people, but in this case Jesus, they say, if our prophet or if Jesus did not actually die and come back to life, that is, if he did not physically, forget allegorically, if he did not physically overcome death, then our whole religion, my whole life, based upon a faith in Christianity or in religion, is a waste. It crumbles. There is nothing left to it. What I was going to say, if a more conscious man, the first time you ever heard that you could be more conscious before you ever heard such stories. The first time you heard it, a more conscious man, well, let's say somebody from another planet, they're more conscious. They come here and they hear that story. They hear somebody absolutely say that. And I'm not talking about, I'm not trying to make fun. People that say that, I'm not trying to dismiss as being so unintelligent and so undeveloped mentally as to be of no consequence. That is still the backbone of this planet. Or if you looked at it another way, one of the driving forces of most people still is a fear of death. They don't consciously think about it continually, but we all know that's true, the ordinary people. So at any rate, if we had someone who was more conscious come here from another planet and they first heard what I just described, they heard some ordinary sane person describing Christianity and them in fact saying that if there is some allegorical potential to a death and resurrection of our prophet, so be it. But that is notwithstanding the fact that the supreme importance, the thing not to forget is that so-and-so, Jesus in this case, actually physically was killed and physically, not allegorically, came back to life for us, which is just simply the old sacrifice story that Jesus died for us. He died so that we won't die. He died and came back to life so that we can do so. This person that came here from another planet that was more conscious, the first time they ever heard a sane person say that, I'm just going to make it up for it, they would go, ah, and they would wait for the person to, finish it up, like for the person that just said that to go, wait a minute, that just made me realize blah, 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 blah. And the person from another planet would wait. Like, boy, they're getting somewhere now, because he just knew. He just knew as soon as it got out of this guy's mouth that he said, well, hey, there may be some allegorical potential to the death and resurrection of our founder, of our religious leader. But the important thing, the thing that may or may not be true, that there may be some allegorical use of his death. But the important thing is, he actually died and came back to life, and we can't forget that, because without that, my whole belief system, this whole thing, this huge thing we call religion, which is just a large part of civilization itself, the mental construct of man, they can say this whole thing collapses. Now follow me, and this guy from another planet, he hears all that, assuming he understands what's going on. He's never heard before, but he understands. He would go, ooh, because he would wait momentarily, because he just knew the guy went through all this and went, because it will render this whole thing moot. He's just waiting. The guy just momentarily is going to go, my God, I never thought about it. Do you realize what that means? The guy from another planet will think, hey, I found somebody I can talk to here in a strange city. But no. No, he stands there and he waits. Of course, being from another planet and a bit smarter, it only took, because he knew the guy was supposed to just be a momentary pause, like a good comedic act, you know, to count the beats. The guy, rah, 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 rah. 1, 2, and the guy go, my God. So then, after just a couple of seconds, the guy from another planet realizes, God, what a waste. What a disappointment. Because he just thought, sure, anybody could say that. Anybody could say, well, unless the founder, and if you want to, those of you getting good, you should be able to get away from the actual being a person, Jesus. We're talking about forces, dynamics at work. That what they're saying is, if this force, in this case my belief, that somebody has died and then got undied, and in some way by me having faith in them and carrying their picture around my billfold or swearing allegiance to it, I will benefit from their undying, from their coming back to life. Then this guy from another planet just knows that anybody would say that and be able to put into words that just momentarily, 1, 2, that the guy's going to go, did you hear what I just said? And the guy from another planet, yeah, like, hey, boy, now we're getting somewhere. Never happened. All right, back to the main subject then. See if that helps. It is not of any particular, it's not, well, it's no longer any useful value to take it simply metaphorically, because metaphorically now is too common a currency of the use of such stories. That the death, and let's go back to the flood. So I was trying to keep our attention to that which I was trying to keep our attention. The flood is just a variation of death. But anyway, you could see that the first stage, going past the literal possibility of there being a worldwide flood, that then the idea, even if it be true, then the idea has got to take on, or it does take on, some degree of metaphorical trappings, or it is not remembered, any more than just being a dead fact. Even if a worldwide flood happened, and we knew that it happened April the 17th, or it started April the 17th, 2262 BC. The day the big flood started, and it went on for, it was over that same year, October the 17th. That's all it would be. It'd be the kind of fact that you would memorize back in high school. That would be it. I don't mean that there would be no memory of it, but that would be all it was, an answer on Jeopardy, or a question on Jeopardy. It would just be a cold fact that you have to memorize. Let's see, the Civil War started, blah, 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 blah. World War II started, blah, blah, blah. Archduke, he was shot, blah, blah, blah. There would be no passion. It would not be a myth. It would not be a story to be remembered. It's simply a fact. For it to become a myth, for it to become a part of man's cultural heritage, other than just a dry date, it has to take on, it does take on, metaphorical trappings. In this case, it is way past the point of any fairly civilized person on this planet, in whatever culture, even if it was not the Judaic flood story we're dealing with, but one of their own local version of it. If they are civilized and developed at all, if they're anywhere up to close to the 21st century in their intellect, collectively, they will agree already that yes, that is quite open to some metaphorical interpretation. But what does it amount to? I've already answered it, but here it is again, is the flood represents, the best they can come up with, the overcoming of man by the forces of ill, forces of evil. It is a regression of man that it is, if it actually happened, at one time man sunk so far in the sight of the gods and the forces of good that he was actually overcome. And if not that, then it represents metaphorically a continuing, impending possibility of a flood that will overtake man. I assume that I will just stick to the flood tonight, but I repeat one more time, all of you, just think about it. You don't have to go back and read or ponder the particular ones. But the history of man is replete with not just flood stories, but legends of catastrophe. They're just everywhere. The flood. What would it represent to someone who understands more than I've described thus far? Well, for one thing, you would have to turn it inside out. The news item tonight, one of them already covered it, that said a conscious man would not be unlike Moses confronting a worldwide flood, or a continuing worldwide flood, except for the fact that he realizes that it's internal and mental in origin. What is it that man, a more conscious man, would see this as being? Not him being overcome by evil forces, either individually or humanity collectively. It is internally him being overcome by, I don't know why I should say this, thought! But here you are again, that it is, there's no description, but I'll rely upon my own feeble attempts in the past. It is something so individual, this fact I just said, is so individual and subtle as to be almost undiscernible, yet so cosmic and all-embracing as to likewise be damn near imperceptible. In other words, me saying that this flood is actually based, the fear, the stories of all the floods are based upon not an external physical flood, not even an external metaphorical flood. It doesn't matter whether you, as long as you're looking externally, it doesn't really matter. You're no better off if you're attempting to find out figure out what, or see what life's about. It doesn't matter whether you take it literally or metaphorically. It's just doing one or the other is a bit more foolish, but hey, out in the ordinary world, hey, you're in for a fool, you're in for twice a fool. It doesn't cost any more to be a dunderhead or to be a metaphorical dunderhead. There is no difference. As long as you're looking externally, it doesn't matter whether the idea of catastrophes, in this case floods, are literal or figurative, or figurative. It doesn't matter, because neither one's going to do you any good. In both cases, you're attempting to separate yourself in some way. You're a fish attempting to separate yourself from the water. It just so happens it works with a flood. A Noah, representing a conscious man, would not see it. Of either being literal, obviously not, that's foolish. Of course, the literal one being that death's going to overtake you. But metaphorically, that I am going to be flooded, man collectively or even me individually, I'm continually staying in a position wherein I could be overcome. I could be actually swamped by something, anything. The obvious one is being evil, ill forces. But it doesn't really matter. Because as long as you are seeing on the basis that I could be overcome by something. Now repeat, it doesn't have to be evil forces. It could be nowadays, it could have the appearance of being much less clerical, much less theological, much less otherworldly in nature. That is, you believe that you are potentially faced with the threat of a flood of uncivil behavior. The whole idea that society is falling apart. It can be a person with no religious inclinations. A card-carrying atheist can still believe that we are continually confronted by a flood. We could just be absolutely overcome by uncivil behavior. As long as you're looking external as the basis of the impending or potential flood, it doesn't matter how you look at it. It doesn't matter whether you look at it literally, metaphorically, and if you look at it metaphorically, it doesn't matter if you do so socially, economically, or religiously. It still gets you nowhere. It would take a more conscious Noah to understand the story of the flood. And I repeat, it's so subtle. I know I said it and you can go ha ha ha, But notice this, you never heard it, you never thought about it, and even though the sentence makes sense, your mind, as soon as it hears it, almost wants to, dismiss it as, well, wait a minute, that's simply another metaphor. Now, I told you it wasn't a damn metaphor. We've already covered metaphors. Metaphors of believing that you might be swamped by a flood arising from without. If you understand the nature of these legends of catastrophe and the flood, a more perceptive Noah is not in danger. He doesn't even look out there. The flood is thought. And even though the sentence makes sense, your own thoughts say, well, that's a pretty neat metaphor. If some of you are being charitable, you might give me credit for a neat metaphor. I said it wasn't a damn metaphor. And the mind goes, well, it has to be. How am I going to be flooded? How am I going to suffer a flood of thought? Because would say thought, as they should. Thought is the very thing that has caused me or made man able to float above the mere reptilian, amphibian, crude animal level. It is only by thought that we are men. True. Well, how the hell can you be flooded? Of course, the inference being, and I do not refute it, that there is some danger there. Then the ordinary thoughts will say, well, how can you say that there is the danger in being flooded by thought when it's thought that raises us above the crude creatures? How can you say that, they would ask. Well, throughout the years I've learned you do it mechanically, but you can change the way your thorax and your vocal, and you make these sounds and you say things like that. And decent thoughts say, very funny. That tells me a lot. Well, I'm glad. In spite of your sarcasm, I'm glad I could be of help. And they would say, no, you don't realize it. I was being sarcastic on top of being sarcastic, and you're either too dumb or you're being too sarcastic to acknowledge my advanced degree of sarcasm. Okay, I did realize it. I'm gonna tell you I did. I knew exactly what I was doing. And thought says, well, wait a minute. In other words, you let me double the stakes of sarcasm, and then you in a subtle and apparently innocuous manner were yourself being super sarcastic by going, oh. All right, to that, when you're caught, you're caught. All I can do is say, oh. There is no such thing as a useful metaphor until you can, and that takes a while, I understand that, but until you can take a metaphor, until you can take symbolism, allegory, which is all, they are not as nebulous a things as they may appear to be, because human language is nothing without the ability of the humans to, in select cases, when appropriate, to be able to take language non-literally. That is one of the distinctions, if you never thought about it, between the civilized and the uncivilized. Because, and now we're into a real position of the relative end of the changeover from civilized to uncivilized, but I could say from those with an intellect fired up sufficiently to qualify as humans, and those just barely so. Because those just barely so, you can find groups of people throughout history, and there's still some around, that their verbalization, their linguistic communications are at a minimum. Well, imagine the old idea, you can do it now, go back in history, rather than me try to use it contemporaneously. And the old idea of caveman and people grunting. Forget whether it literally happened, but you can imagine. If you can't imagine, you can look at children, the evolution of children, but it happens so quickly, and normally the children are part of your blood kin, and therefore people especially, parents do not want to look upon their children as little skint pigs and boiled owls and this is my baby, and so they don't realize that the kid is going through it. May only take the kid a couple of days rather than a couple of billion years, but the kid goes from being a very crude specimen, a very crude reflection of what may turn out to be a sentient creature, a thinking creature. But at any rate, back to the cartoon idea right quick. You can imagine that, or as I said, some of you can probably, since I said that, you can see it in the evolution of a child, the development of a child. But as humanity is starting out, that even before there was language as such, you can picture the idea of Homo sapiens, or at least the progenitors of Homo sapiens as we know him, grunting. That was the beginning of communication, because even animals, there's no secret, there's the higher of the primates, some, even in the insect world, plenty of the animals communicate, that they do something. They do not have to physically do something, that they can make sound. And that one of them that sends a message to another one. So on that same basis, you can picture man at the evolution of language is starting out, that one man sees something that's maybe good to eat, and the rest of them don't know it, and he's already found it, and they're out walking in the woods, and he points to it and goes, or maybe one of them, they go, like, we're hungry, let's go by, and he goes, and they've never seen this kind of bush, and everybody goes, ooh, he goes, So you can imagine that it was not actually words, but it was sound. Work with me. The step from there to real language, understand, you could call somebody, you could call a group of people. If we had them right now on some isolated island somewhere, we finally find them. And they're just still, probably we describe as a Stone Age or pre-Stone. Anyway, they're just grunting. They do not really have a language, but they do something. They communicate, they have some repertoire of sounds in a different sound. You would know immediately. Of course, everything's connected, and they would probably be ill-dressed, probably not dressed at all. Their living conditions would be extremely primitive, and so it all fit. But if nothing else, as soon as you heard the you would realize, I could be with you, or somebody with you, and say, do you realize we have found, probably so to speak, figuratively, a kind of missing link between man in the pre-civilized state and his actually minimally civilized state, because you realize they're just making animal sounds. I mean, even though they are unique to this group of people, in other words, they're human sounds, but they have not actually developed words. They're just still using sounds, but they can communicate in a limited area. There is someone, if not absolutely pre-civilized, there is civilized man in an extremely inchoate, nascent state. It's just barely beginning. And the difference would be if they finally do develop actual words, because once you develop words, then you can change the context of the words. You know, you can turn a word into a past participle, you can turn it into a past reference, you can turn it into a future reference, whereas just a sound, you go, and you're stuck with right now. There's no way. I never really thought about it. Somebody wants to try to figure it out. Trust me, I can tell. There's no way to turn into like with an ED on it. Like you can't go, let's this next week sometime. It only, if it has any validity and anything seems to get communicated between the two people, it has to be right now. There is no, anyway. So you could see that language, the development of words, would be a kind of next defining state of being civilized. But, believe it or not, back to. So, that is the first stage, you could say, and from one view, the first real stage, or first real evidence that a person, a group of people, are civilized. That they can now express, not in sounds, but actual words that are pliable. That they can change the tense of the word, for instance, among other things. The next stage, to be truly civilized, the people will. They do not plan it, but language will in part become metaphorical. Or else you've got nothing. Nothing could go past the original level. You would have none of the aspects of civilization. No art, no literature, no music, no religion, no social structure, no government. You have to be able to think past the point that all your language does is you go, rock. And that's when I go, damn good rock too. Or let's go rock hunting. Okay. Let's go hunt some rocks. Let's go find some water. I'll go with you to find water. Let's go. Okay, let's go. Water, right? Water. Go get some water. That's it. Nothing wrong with that. But you have got to, language, and I say got to, one does not cause the other. Again, it's a simultaneous appearance. But if you find a people that have gone past that stage, which they always do, either that or they disappear. They go off to live with Elvis and the dinosaurs. So if they go any further, then the next time you see them, and not the song by Don Robley, but the next time you see them, they will be speaking metaphorically. They will no longer be speaking simply about water and rocks and food, which is necessary to start with. But they will now be speaking in such a way, and they will not analyze it or even know the word metaphor or allegory, but you will recognize they are now speaking, because if they're now past that original basic minimal level, they would now have interest in life beyond the survival. The topic of their conversations, the activities in their life would no longer just be eating, sleeping, and screwing and finding a shelter. They would now have other interests, normally what we'd call aspects of civilization. But to do that, your mind and language itself, but the mind now has to begin to take what it says, not everything of course, but to be able to take it metaphorically. It is that stage after that that no one ever experiences. The stage after that that is the true bailiwick, the pure land of the mystical, or someone attempting to push their own consciousness. Because simply being able to think metaphorically is no great shakes. It really proves nothing other than you're minimally civilized and intelligent at a level that means nothing. Because there's something past the metaphor. And I was trying to use the example tonight that anybody can see, because they could be irrefutable or acceptable physical evidence. Geological evidence that there has been a flood. Okay, there's been a flood. But then to even be minimally civilized and intelligent at the city level, in the city sense, you have got to be able to, in addition to that, at least in addition to that, accept, whether it change your life or not, but to accept, to appreciate the potential validity of an allegorical interpretation of this physical event, that a flood could exist, maybe did exist, but if we continue to talk about it and someone says, you realize that the flood itself, a physical flood, is not the thing of importance. It is whether man realizes that he is continually faced by a potential flood of evil, uncivilized forces. And people think that is a big step. Yes, it is, if you want to call it that, if it makes you feel better. But that's a step that you take mechanically, if you're civilized at all. You don't go around thinking to yourself that, well, I am thinking again metaphorically. Almost, in one sense, almost anything you think that has not to do directly with survival matters is allegorical. That's the only way it's tolerated. For people to say music is very important in my life, no matter how much you like music. If we all agree music's a great thing, for somebody to say, by God, I'd almost rather have a good new CD to hear a good band than I would eat. You know damn well that's metaphorical. Either that or you're talking to a maniac to say, all right, I'm going to withhold for the next 6 months your CD player or food. It's all metaphorical. You have got to be, if a man understands anything, then he is a Noah past that point. That the flood, instead of it being metaphorical, perhaps literally true and metaphorically significant, it is something beyond that. But the ordinary mind, even when it sees metaphorically, it always sees the metaphors as having significance and having their origins out there. That yes, we may be in danger of being overcome by a flood, but it's always a flood of something out there. That's still metaphor. And that will not take you anywhere. Well, past a certain point. And you can get there just by riding life's coattails, by being pushed along and prodded. The life says, look down here, and you look. And in a sense, you're metaphorical right then. Because you got no business looking down there. Life says, look down here. And as soon as you look down, you realize it's not anything you can screw, eat, or it's nothing to do you any good. And it goes, look over here. It opens its coat. Not dirty pictures, which might be of some use. No. It's the text from the Bhagavad Gita. Goethe, Shakespeare. And you go, hey, now this is interesting. Interesting, but not significant. You have to take it metaphorically, whether you know it or not, for it to even have the appearance of significance. A Noah, representing my more conscious version, has got to see, or would see, that the reality of a flood is not something external. It is internal, and it is mental, and it is thought, which makes no sense whatsoever to thoughts, to tell them that. Or if it makes it easier, to the mind, the apparent You're killing me. Generator, origins of thought. That you tell the mind. Yeah, the flood is not external, the potential. It's thought. You have told the mind, you have told lungs that their biggest drawback, if they're going to get anywhere, they have got to avoid air. And lungs look at you, as ordinary people look at this kind of idea and go, yeah, right. If I'm in town, I'll tune you in next week. You get on? All right. I know it's of no nature.